Hi, everyone. Welcome back. This is Kelly Jenwick and Michelle Seidler. We are walking through the fascinating story of Michelle Seidler and her book, Psychic to Profit. And we just started, we launched the series. You can jump on in with us. We just posted chapter 1, and now we're launching into chapter 2, specifically focusing on her story and how it all began and the depths of how she started as a psychic and how she came to the Lord and came to the Holy Spirit and how that seer gift was developed. So, Michelle, I'm super excited to just have the conversation and hear more of your heart and your background, and especially because the Bible says that the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. And so what you've walked through is an invitation for all of us, out of brokenness, out of darkness. We can all relate. And so I'm excited just to hear the voice of the Lord in your story. And so I know, my goodness, it has so many twists and turns, but God was faithful to bring you forward. And so I just want you to kind of take it away.
Okay. Yeah, this part today, chapter 2, is really centered around, chapter 1, just to summarize, was kind of hitting my childhood, kind of being a gifted child and some of the things that I went through. Of course, we touched on some other things. We got way ahead in that one, which was good. And this one, we're going to focus more on kind of obviously that next stage that was more centered around my time in mental institutions and what brought me out of that and what God did. I mean, there's some funny stories in there, but really, I mean, as I got into like my mid teenage years, um, it really was. I mean, I said this in chapter 1. I really, not only did I have my challenges with just seeing and living in the reality of this, this spirit realm and the natural realm at the same time, which, by the way, this spirit realm was way more real to me than the natural realm. And so it was super confusing for me. You know, this place of the reality of people in front of you, and yet your reality of what you're experiencing was really challenging for me. But not only did I have that, and of course, we talked in chapter 1 about how I soaked up, you know, everything in my environment. When I was around angry people, I became angry. When I was around sad people, I became sad, of course, not knowing at first that none of that was me. So not only was there that,
Can I touch on
yeah,
that real fast? Is
yeah,
that so many times, we sense things, like we can feel a certain emotion when we get to a certain place. And again, learning to discern that that's not you, but it is the spirit realm going on around you. And so I think that that's just another critical thing to bring up. Again, I'll let you take it away with your story, but that's just such a good point, that when we're encountering different people and we have these different emotions, that we can learn to separate between the emotion or the spirit and what's really going on in our lives, and that we're encountering something else.
yeah, absolutely. And I really want to point out, like, I think for depending on where you're at in your journey with that, because we're all affected by the spirit realm, whether we realize it or not. We're affected by atmospheres, physically, emotionally, mentally. We're all affected by that. And, for me, it was just way more intense. And depending on where you're at and your level of understanding that, you can separate, right? You can feel sad and go, cognitively, you can go, gosh, that's just not me. What's going on, right? Like you think about it, you're processing it. For me, I wasn't processing any of that. When I was taking it all in, it was as it was me, as if it was me.
Mm.
So there was no separation for me at first. I was just angry. I was just sad. I was just happy. I was confused, just um like I said, and so I got literally, I mentioned this, and we don't have to go over it again, but I remember the day that I'll never forget the day when it clicked in me that this is not me.
Mm.
And it changed my whole world. And that was where my seeing became even more clear.
Oh.
But yeah, I just wanted to make that point that for me it wasn't even like, oh, I'm in an atmosphere of sadness. I mean, of course I was a kid and then a preteen, you're not, even the idea of this spiritual things like that, like there was no language for me for any of that. So that's why, I mean, it was super, super confusing. And added to that, I was in a very dysfunctional home. So, that just added to the dynamics of what was going on. My mom, at the time when I was younger, she was in school full time, working full time in school full time, getting her master's in psychology. And then she just went on and on and on and on. So she was constantly in school. And so that was her background. And even though she was always searching for a spiritual path, I remember that with my mom. Unfortunately, we did have an experience in a church when we were really young. My parents were married, divorced, married, divorced. It was a constant, you know, back and forth thing. So at one point, me and my sister were living with my mom, and we went to a church, and it really embraced us, took us in. We were really close to the pastor, his wife, his family, and I have a few memories of that time. But apparently, and my mom was very broken at the time, coming out of a narcissistically abusive relationship, and so she's navigating all of that. And the pastor made a really severe pass at my mom. He was hitting on my mom. He came on to her, and it devastated my mom. It literally drove her from the church. And so we, along with my mom, went into every other kind of spiritual practice you can think of at the time. So she was constantly searching. Um, and she had that in her. However, she had a real firm background in psychology. So of course, that was all she knew to do with me. She did not know what to do with me. And she really did. God bless her. I think of it now. She's passed away quite a while now, but I think about, my gosh, if now me having a grown daughter, what that would have been like for her to have a daughter like me. I mean, my daughter's gifted even more than me. But of course, she didn't have the same, is different, right? And of course, she had me that had some understanding. And I was just wild on top of that. No filter, I mean, like, if I thought it, if I saw it, I said it. It got me in so much trouble. And I talk about some of that in my book. It was like the police knew me. I held the record, nothing to brag about, but I did hold the record in the adolescent unit of the Florida hospital, which is Advent Health now. In the it's not the state hospital, but it's mental for adolescents in the hospital. And I held the record for being there the most. Yeah, I think I got up to like 12 different times, and within a couple years span. And so the hospital knew me, the doctors knew me, the police knew me. I was not mild in anything that I did. I was extreme, and And so that made things even more difficult for me. And so, again, with my mom having that background, um, what do? You just put her, you got to put her somewhere because I couldn't be contained, like I did what I wanted. No one could tell me what to do. And, you know, um, and so, yeah, that hence my times in facilities that ranged from adolescent units, which basically are a part of the hospital, like I said, for, um, you know, teenagers. And then I had times in the state hospital when
Mhm.
the mom's insurance would run out, and it
Mhm.
did. They would put me in the state hospital, which is a whole other thing. It's the
Mm.
crazy of the crazies, any age. And then I talk about at the very end of my time, they put me in an unlocked group home facility, which was kind of more the end of, my journey of that. But that went on from about 13 years old until 16. So it was probably about 4 years of just constant in and out of these different places. Actually, it was probably closer to 17, 16, 17. Um, yeah. So that's the bulk of um, my time in the mental institutions.
I find it very interesting you share in your book just how you cried with your mom
Yeah.
and just you weren't it brings me to tears because
Yeah.
I think about and you were punished for having tears very severely and
Yes.
just the brokenness of our state institutions that
Yeah.
you're not allowed to show emotion, and so I can't imagine that experience. Did you want to elaborate on that?
Sure. Yeah. I'm telling you that time in my book really traumatized me. That I had to deal with a lot of that inner trauma just, I mean, probably in the last 10 years. It did so much in me, the trauma, but then also, well, so I'll tell you what happened. This was in the state hospital you're talking about. It was, I think, I'm pretty sure it was the first time I went into the state hospital. It might not have been. But I think it was. And so they put me in there and I was there maybe like 2 days, 3 days, and my mom came to visit me. And they put us like at this little table, a little small table, and we're sitting across from each other. And I'm saying, my heart was just, my heart was broken because I didn't understand. I didn't understand why I was there because I was looking around at these people, and I couldn't understand why my mom would do this to me. There was so much abandonment. Because I mean, if you can imagine, I don't want anyone feeling sorry for me. Please don't feel sorry for me. God has redeemed and used all of this. So please do not feel sorry for me. But just to really hit it, like if you can imagine, I remember being in my room. I had a roommate, and I remember being in my room so many times, not just then, but many different times, and just feeling the utter depth of abandonment, of being left alone.
Mm.
And and so that feeling sitting with my mom that is just so painful and going and crying. Now I was crying and I'm real quiet, just like, "Mom, please explain to me why I'm here." And I'm crying. It was like that. Um, and the nurses saw me crying and came and got me, took me away from my mom, literally picked me up and was taking me away from my mom. And which of course further triggered me screaming, because again, I never internalized things. I'm an external person. So like I said, it all came out of my mouth, which always made things worse for me. Um, I started screaming, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this?" And I kept saying all I was doing was crying. All I was doing was crying. And I'm looking at my mom as they're taking me away and just doing nothing. That was mm, that was hard. So then they literally took me to a room and tied me down essentially to a bed, and my hands, my legs, everything, and I just had there was nothing in the room but a camera on me. And I was like that for 3 days. Of course, I probably could have gotten out of the situation earlier. But in my mind, I was so off the rails screaming, "Why am I here? Why are you doing this to me?" I felt such depths of injustice.
Mm.
I know what it's like to feel deep, deep wounds of injustice. I can't, there's no words to explain how it feels to have something happen to you that is so unjustified,
Yeah.
so wrong, and so cold.
Yeah.
All I experienced was complete lack of care, concern, love, empathy, compassion, anything. It was just very cold. And
Mm.
so that it I don't want to say it broke me. um but to a degree it did, which is probably what I wanted to do. And I know for a lot of people it probably would have caused them to completely shut down in terms of their voice. But I thank God that didn't happen to me long term.
Sure.
Um, but I did learn, I did learn some things, let's just put it that way. But yeah, I didn't lose my voice entirely,
Yeah. Mm.
but it did wound me. My voice wasn't what was wounded the most. What wounded me was just this internal abandonment and injustice
Yeah.
and the pain of I'm alone in this.
Yeah.
Having no one, my dad wasn't around. That was the reality for me. I'm alone on this journey and no one's going to help me. And I think that was more of what I really took with my journey all the way through. I'm alone in this. No one's going to help me. It did create a real independent spirit
Mm.
because I realized no one's going to be there for me. No one's going to help me except me. That was rooted at that time.
Um,
Yeah. And my mom, we talked about it, of course, years later, and I didn't hold, um, yeah, I was angry with my mom, but even that wasn't something so deeply rooted in me where I held a lot of animosity towards her. I'm not sure why. I think I did have a level of understanding.
yeah.
Um, but I never completely
Yeah.
that wasn't a real huge issue.
No. She was just, according to her psychology degree, where, you get all these boxes and labels,
Yeah.
you didn't know what to do. That was the way forward. And it's just unfortunate that in those institutions, your voice isn't allowed. You're not allowed to show emotion, or you're just labeled as crazy. And there's not that sense of human connection or honoring a person's humanity and what they're facing. But in the midst of all of that, you did encounter a woman who shared with you about the and meditation and
Oh,
that.
that was a different time and a different, and that was in the adolescent unit. That wasn't in the middle.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so she, from that young age, even though we're kind of going backwards a little bit, she really sewed into your spirit just the new age way, so to speak.
Yeah, really funny, and I'll tell you a little bit about that, but really funny, ran into her many years later, when I was waiting tables at Bennigan's, and, I had it was like l re it was, like, right after I had kind of gotten saved, which we could talk more about that later, but, um, she remembered me. I didn't remember her, but she remembered me, and we started talking about how, where I was and what had happened. It was a great encouragement to her because she knew, like, I was one of the worst, and, it was really wild. That was a real wild thing for me, but yeah, she, was one of the nurses in the adolescent unit, and, she gave me, like, back then we had Walkmans, and gave me some cassettes for some meditation music, and really brought me books on new age stuff, and we would she would take us in and do even group meditations with different ones of us. And so yeah, it was at that point where it helped me to a degree, but in a very small degree at that time, some kind of context. It gave me somewhere to put everything that was going on. Um, it gave me a direction. But again, I didn't really go super deep into it. Oh, I couldn't, obviously, at that time. Um, it was, it was more just kind of meditations and aliens. And so I forgot the lady's name, Shirley MacLaine. That would have been back then at the time. Late 80s, early 90s. So yeah, she really did benefit my life, believe it or not. Even though she brought me in that direction, it was a form of she showed care.
Yeah. Right. And some kind of pathway to release
Right.
and some form of consult.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I know throughout your chapters you have some funny stories and some more intense ones, like
Yeah.
where the woman you think gets caught up, raptured by God.
Did. There's a few stories in there people always bring up to me, but this one, honestly, even today, it still is like the glory came in the room and I was asleep and it didn't even wake me up. That's how far gone I was. I know that is what happened. I know it. Back then, honestly, I kind of was like, couldn't be bothered.
Right.
But they were so perplexed. The nurses, the police were so perplexed, questioning me, and I just was irritated. I was like, whatever. But
Right.
yeah, this my roommate, um, she was obsessive. She was kind of one of this state hospital again. Um, Older, I would say she was probably in her 40s, maybe. I don't know. Not any older than 45-ish, probably 30 to 45. Anyway, she was one of those that walked around everywhere, like in the kind of common areas, cleaning up. I mean, back then people could smoke. There were ashtrays. She was cleaning ashtrays, like, a just super compulsive person. And didn't talk to anyone, but was just really, kind of quiet. Well, um, she had probably been my roommate 2 nights or something, and this one night, it's embarrassing to say how I reacted, but sh she literally was pacing. It's like the beds were here, and she was at the bottom of the beds, pacing back and forth all night. I mean, hours and hours and hours. All she said was, "Thank you, dear Jesus. Thank you, dear Jesus. Thank you, dear Jesus." All she said all night, and I was screaming at her, "Shut up. Go to sleep." Of other obscene words that I won't repeat, but I was so angry. But eventually I just fell asleep. Well, the next morning, I wake up and the nurses come in, the police come in, and they're like, "Where did she?" I can't remember her name, but they were like, "Where did she go?" I'm like, How am I supposed to know? I don't know." Like, where did she? I'm not her keeper. Um, and they were like, "Well, she's not anywhere to be found." And you have to understand the state hospital has huge metal doors. Like, no one is getting out of that place. There's one way out, one way in, and they are metal doors. Like, there was one common area that was like had it was open where it had fresh air. Like, you were outside, but it was all like there was no way to get out of there. It was like caged in. And they were like, literally, they were looking up at the vents. Like, did she get out through the vents? The windows? Nowhere. The woman, they could not find her anywhere. She disappeared.
Mm.
And of course, I have no evidence. But my assessment later on was like, he took her. He took her out of that room. Jesus did. She was like persistent. I mean, she had persistence.
Wow.
And no one could explain. I mean, it was like this big thing in the hospital. Like, where did she go? They couldn't find her anywhere. And so, yeah, that one was really bizarre. Really bizarre. I mean, I had one time, there's so many stories. Um, I had one time I was playing cards out with some people in the common area, and I look over and this man comes out. I see him walking, and he's got my underwear on his head,
Lord.
like a hat. And like he's wearing a hat, and I'm screaming at him, like, "What are you doing? Why were you in my room? And why do you have my underwear on your head?" And he's like, "This is my hat." Like, no, I mean, like, real sincerely crazy,
Yeah.
really mentally unstable. "This is my hat." And I'm like, "No, that's not your hat." It becomes this big fight. Of course, they take him and put him away in the kind of seclusion, and you could hear him howling all night long. So yeah, I mean, that like gives a little bit of a taste of what it was like. It was constant stories of things, like that. Yeah, crazy.
Wow.
Mhm.
So out of the, locked chamber that you were, your life did transition where you ended up going to more of an unlocked facility. And this was a major pillar in your
Yeah.
story that makes me deeply emotional. And I love to hear you just share about that.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So yeah, it was actually the last place I would ever end up in. And it was an unlocked facility. It was like a group home in Winter Park, Florida. Actually, probably about a mile from where I live now, which is just bizarre.
Wow.
It was like in a residential area. And I was there maybe, I don't know, a week or something like that. And it was the middle of the night, and I got up and I left. And honestly, from what I remember now, I really don't know where I was going. I don't think that I even had a destination to where I was going. I just was running.
Right.
I
Because this
just,
is the first time that
yeah, that I
you
could.
wasn't locked in. This is the first time you could
Yeah,
open the door and leave.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
so you just had it in your mind. I'm getting out of here. Don't
Yeah,
know where I'm going. Okay.
absolutely. And, I walked probably, I don't know how many miles. I think I still try to remember that to this day because I ended up on the other side of Winter Park, but regardless, I'm walking down this street and sorry, I was thinking about um, I had, my ankle had swollen. Sorry. My ankle had swollen and I couldn't walk anymore. And so, I sat down on a bench and, there was a payphone. Back then we had payphones. Right next to me. It was like a bus stop, I think, and a payphone there. And and I looked at and I'm just resting because I couldn't walk because of my ankle. And I look up and I see this billboard and it said, run away, need help, call this 800 number. So, it's so funny because I really didn't have much of a brain at all. I'm really amazed myself thinking back, like I had no brain. Like, so I'm like, well, let me call the number. I mean, here I was, I ran away from a group home and I'm calling someone to come get me. Like, like, you're just going to end up back where you came from. Like, what was I don't know. But I think I was just at a loss of like, what else am I going to do?
Right.
And so I called the number and this van comes and picks me up middle of the night and takes me to it's called the House of Hope.
Can I just pause real quick and
Yeah.
just share like the utter miracle of you just run out the door, you walk for however long, you sit on a bench, your ankle is swollen, you look up, and
Yeah.
there is the billboard that says,
Yeah.
run away, call this number.
Yeah. Okay. So pause on that because again, crazy story. This would have been 2004, 2000, not this part, but fast forward to the year 2004. I was getting ready to move to Kansas City and I thought, I want to go see Sarah Trollinger before I leave. There's a long span of time. And she had at that time had grown tremendously. And now probably many have heard of the House of Hope. She's got them all over the country and they're male and female, but the one that I went to was her very first house. She told me later, she had just started it like within that year. And there were um, uh, 5 girls or something like that. So it's grown tremendously, tremendously. But anyway, fast forward to 2004, I go see her, make a call, get an appointment. She remembered me. And she tells me, she asked me, she goes, I had wondered so often, like, how did you find the number, to call? And I said, well, I saw the billboard. She said, Michelle, we never had billboards. And I was like, no, you did. You had a billboard. She said, we never had billboards. No joke. I was like astonished. I'm finding this out in 2004. She literally took me throughout the whole campus she had back then, interrupted every single meeting that was going on, and had me give my testimony. But then at that point, I had come to the Lord and all of that. And she was just so elated. She's like, you're one. She goes, so many kids leave that we can't keep, and they go and we never know what happens to them. And she's like, I wondered what had happened to you. And she was just so blessed. Um, she actually asked me to come work for her. And of course, I was going to Kansas City, so I couldn't. And I did go back and see her again and introduced her to my daughter. She tried to get me to work for her then. She tried to get my daughter to work for her. She's really old now. I think she's like in her early 90s or something. But yeah, they never had billboards. crazy.
Yeah.
So,
And just to back up, so you get in the van, it
yeah.
takes you to her facility, and in that place you encounter this, you said, this love, this authority, and she, for the
Yeah.
time, really preached the gospel to you
Mhm.
and ministered to you in such a mighty way. But then you say that she wasn't able to keep you there, but it was such an impactful moment in your life where the Lord sowed the power of the gospel into your life.
Yeah. Yeah, so profound. I remember, so yeah, the van takes me in and it was a house. And I sit down in her office and I remember feeling from her this real sense of authority that rested on her, like a strength and an authority, but with so much compassion at the same time. Funny thing, I write this in the book too. I remember it kind of validated her to me. I looked over on the wall and I saw a picture with her and President Reagan. I'm like, okay, she's legit. But yeah, so that really got my attention, about her. And she asked me what was going on with me, I explained it all to her. And she said, Michelle, you're not crazy. She said, you're gifted. And she proceeds to tell me about Jesus. And for me, it wasn't just someone, just preaching the gospel to me. It was anointing. There was like supernatural anointing that I felt, that had me weeping and crying and just, yeah, I mean, giving my life, giving my heart, asking, and and she said, I'm gonna call your mom. And I was like, uh-oh. Well, first she said she can't keep me. They were at capacity.
Yeah.
So they couldn't keep me. Um, but she did offer like that I could be involved with some things which didn't end up happening. But she called my mom and my mom came and she sat down with my mom and she said to my mom, your daughter's not crazy. She's gifted.
Yeah.
And my mom believed her. My mom actually accepted her words
Yeah.
and took me home. And that's my life takes another huge turn, where I went from this experience, right into deeper darkness in a different way because my mom, in her mind, again, not knowing what to do, she didn't take me to a church. It was really quickly after I got home, she actually took me to Casadega. And Casadega, most people in Central Florida know about it. It's a witch town, right, north of Orlando. And there are psychics. It's literally a community of people who, and still exists today, mediums, psychics, healers. They have bookstores, restaurants. Like it's a whole huge community. And my mom thought, well, she's gifted in this way. I'm going to take her to a place where this stuff goes on.
Mm.
And she made an appointment for me with a clairvoyant, a psychic clairvoyant.
Mm.
And the first time I sat down, by the way, this woman would be one who helped shape my life for a long time. She discipled me in many ways for many years after that. But
As in her clairvoyance. Okay.
yeah, um, the first time I sat down with her, she said, "You're going to be doing what I'm doing one day." She knew nothing about me, you know. My mom didn't give her any information, but she basically affirmed me, not knowing anything. And that I cannot tell you what that did in me. It was like, to a degree, the "I'm crazy," which was a legitimate war,
Yes.
it ended that day
Wow.
because she affirms who I was in my gifting, and it set the course for me of where I would begin to start to dive in to all of these, everything you can think of. I've devoured anything in the new age, and very quickly, um, I advanced very quickly in my gifts,
Mm.
um, and was known in the community, even the youngest in the community. Um, yeah, so I think maybe that's for, maybe we could finish, talk about that in
Yeah.
the next video, but yeah,
Yeah.
because there's a lot to say about my
Yeah.
psychic life.
Absolutely. That's kind of the teaser for the next video here.
Yeah.
But what makes me stand in awe and what brought me to tears was the way God found you and how he finds all of us. And somehow you saw a billboard to call
It exists.
that
Yeah,
it didn't even exist.
I know.
Stand in awe of the ways of God and how he
Me
found
too.
you. And I celebrate that so deeply. It leaves me utterly speechless.
Yeah.
Very profound and beautiful.
Yeah, I would say even in 2004, I mean, of course, it was profound for me at that time, but I would say even in 2004, like, to hear that there wasn't a billboard, just, man, it just did it was a whole nother level for me. But, I have to say, like, when I left Sarah that day, even though it was really, like, profound what happened to me
Yeah.
that day, and what happened and what I said and what I went through really faded.
Yeah.
As I started to dive into these other things,
Mhm.
um, that faded. And it wasn't that I was saying no to anything, because I didn't even know it was wrong. I didn't even know about Jesus. Like, yes, I mean, she preached the gospel to me, but I didn't know that this was not that, or you know what I mean? It was all blurry
Yeah. Yeah.
to me. Of course, I would find out soon enough, but it faded. And but I love something Sarah said to me again when I saw her in 2004. She said, um, it was so encouraging to her. She said, and it restarted her. She said, because the word does not return void. The
Mhm.
word was sent out, and it did what it was sent to do. It
Mhm.
didn't happen right away,
Yeah.
but that was a seed that day that was planted in me, that actually did really affect, I believe, my journey, even as a psychic, because it wasn't just me being a psychic. I I'll explain it this way. That realm
Yeah.
is similar to when you think of, like, the Christianity or anything else for that matter. There's always a hunger for more,
Yeah. Mhm.
right? It's like even in God, you're never satisfied, right? You're like, oh, there's more of him, there's more of him. I want to go deeper, right? There's this constant, but it's satisfying. You're not satisfied, but it's satisfying. It's life-giving.
Yes.
Right. In that realm, it's the same way. There's the hunger and the pull for the more, but the more leads you into deeper realms of darkness, and it's not satisfying.
Yeah.
It's like a perpetual pulling that never satisfies. And I so that had me searching and searching. I got into witchcraft. I got into deeper realms of witchcraft. I was doing magic,
Yeah.
which we can talk about later, but it um it definitely just kind of pulled me even more into that darkness and away from that day that just, like I said, kind of faded.
Well, I find it interesting that for the first time in your life, this clairvoyance affirms you, affirms gifting where your whole life have been interacting with the spirit realm. You didn't have language for it. And now here is this woman telling you you're gifted. There's nothing wrong with you. And I think of the church at large today that is pretty scared of the spirit realm. Of again, we were made, the dark side only twists what's right.
Right.
So again, it's not that you were wrong, it was just she was the only one who had answers for you, which kind of catapulted you into that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. It was seriously just that declaration from her settled
Yeah.
something in my identity because there was such a war over my identity.
Yeah.
And her saying, "This is who you are," essentially, for me at the time. Sounds crazy, but it settled so many issues. And again, I never went back into a facility after that. That realm, that phase for me ended.
Yeah.
I think I still coursed back then. They had me on so much medication to try to dull all that out. And it did actually. A lot of things were dulled out, were which probably was good until they actually. But and I think I was still on, maybe I was kind of getting off medication, but other than that, it literally just that was the end of a phase for
Yeah.
me. Never went back. I didn't even see doctors anymore. I would say there was my one, I talk about this in my book. There was my psychiatrist that I was still seeing outside of things for a while, who actually asked my mom if she would continue bringing me to the group sessions. He was like, "Don't worry if your insurance can't pay for it. You don't have to pay for it. Don't worry about it. I just want you to bring Michelle." Um, because I helped him in the groups.
Right.
Basically, what I would do is so funny when I think about this now. I was like, what a gift that would be to a psychiatrist in a group setting. But I was so insensitive and wild. And I literally would sit in that group and I would call out everybody's stuff. Like, and it just popcorn, it like got helped the doctor so much. And so that went on for a little while, afterwards, but that phased out obviously too.
Wow. So that was actually your seer anointing in operation, assisting these professionals.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, that you don't have language for it. You don't know it. It's just what's natural to you. And
Yeah. Of course, I wasn't even intentionally doing it because it wasn't cognitive. I was just being me.
sure.
It wasn't like, "Ooh, I'm gonna call this out." Like, no, that wasn't even my reality at all. It was just me being me in conversation. You think about, like, I really didn't know. I mean, at this point, I did. I knew that other people weren't like that because I was getting in a lot of trouble for it. But you you don't have, like, there's no separation, and so I'm just naturally like, "You've got this going on. This is your issue. This is that. This." I could see it so clear,
Right.
and no filter.
Right.
So that was just me, not thinking I'm calling someone's stuff out.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Right.
Just, yeah. I had such a love. I will say this. I had been so lied to. For example, growing up in my pre mental institution days and mental institution days, but going from as far back as I can remember, I always like people would lie to me to my face, and I knew they were lying. And I would call people on stuff. Of course, they're like, no, no, no. And so you get this, like, you know, it added to the you're crazy thing. But then there were so many things that happened where I knew someone was lying, and then the truth would come out that they were lying. So it did affirm that what I did was right.
Mm.
So I had this real issue from even many, 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 many years about deception, about lying. I still do. There's nothing I hate more. There's nothing I hate more. And so that was such a because I had been so lied to, it wounded me. I mean, I could tell you stories of things that just, yeah. So having that gave me such a love for truth.
Mm.
So I was even in the new age. That was what was at work in me was this love for truth. And so in that instance, even with the professionals, it was me just being honest.
Right.
I wasn't doing anything to be mean ever. I didn't have a mean spirit. I really never did. I had a rebellious spirit for
Sure.
sure.
Yeah.
But I always, had a love for people. But so for me, it was just, I'm just telling you the truth. I'm trying to help you,
Sure.
which always was like backfiring on me. But I'm like, I'm trying to help you,
Yeah.
yeah.
I would be curious, even as we're all developing seers, how would you see people's issues, or how did you know people were lying to you? Can you kind of explain that sixth sense or that spiritual knowing that you had in these instances where you didn't even know you were operating in that realm?
Yeah. It's of course it's so different now because it's developed, obviously.
Yeah.
But how do I explain it? It's like so hard to explain. You just know.
Yeah.
It's kind of like if you and I were sitting together and looking out a window and we're looking at a tree that's right there, and you're telling me the tree is blue. And I'm like, no, the tree's not blue. It's green.
Mm.
Like I see it. I know. Like it's discernment. I have a very strong gift of discernment that works. We talked about that last time with the seer gift. Um, and so I see it. I know. I can, and there's a lot to be said about that now again, developing it
Yeah.
because things have a sound, they
Mm.
have a smell. And so back then it was more like when I first started encountering things where I realized people were lying to me, it did confuse me at first, and I questioned myself again, like I said, am I crazy? But then it just perpetuated it because I saw that I wasn't. I was right with over and over and over again. And some major things too, by the way, that really created a lot of issues. I talk about some of it in the book. Um, but yeah, it was it's the best way I can explain it. Like I just
Mm.
knew by I just knew truth and a lie.
Mm.
Knew the difference.
Hmm.
Um,
That inner knowing. Mm.
it's not the same as I know where you're going, like with prophetic, like the inner knowing, it's not the same.
Mm.
It's different. It's more like like I said, the best way I can explain it is us are both looking at a tree. That's how aware I am
Mm,
that what you're saying isn't like, I know it's a lie.
mm,
It's literally I think a lot of it has to do with it's like if you know a person, right? And someone comes to you pretending to be that person, you know the difference.
yeah.
It's like that. It's like there's a distinction. That's discernment, though. That's the you're able to separate truth from lie, light from darkness.